is an avant-garde composer and conceptual artist specializing in traditional Japanese instruments. She's going to speak about her experiences working as a neurodivergent multidisciplinary artist that works in both English and Japanese. In the film, Verity introduces herself sitting in a black chair with her electric piano behind her. She's a white woman in her 30s with long brown hair. Send your comments for Verity via the Facebook or YouTube comment sections or the hashtag #DAOCovid Commissions. So now I'm going to hand over to Verity.
Hi Verity.
Hi.
Could you introduce your art practice and what you do?
Great. So my name is Verity Lane and I'm a multidisciplinary artist, director, composer and producer that specialises in creating live performance work steeped in Japanese culture. I also explore the human experience through themes of nature and Japanese folklore, also some of my own writings as well. I'm also neurodivergent, so I have dyslexia and cognitive dyspraxia, which is why I'm using this handy prompt here to help me explain exactly what I do, because everything is quite complex and this kind of helps me keep focused. So over the years, I have adapted my practices to being neurodivergent, and I'd like to speak about this now.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, I started off in classical music. I started playing the violin at the age of 6, and then at the age of 10 I studied composition with the Indian composer John Mayer. We studied a lot of non-Western music and I took a particular interest in Japanese music.
Tell us a bit more about your modern day practice and Japan.
So I actually ended up living in Japan for 10 years. I didn't plan on it, it just kind of happened. So my journey started out with going to SOAS, so I did Japanese and music, and part of the course was to spend a year in Japan. So I went over for 1 year and started to learn the language, which obviously being dyslexic is quite difficult, but I'll come on to that later. But yeah, I studied a little bit about Japanese music as well in my year in Japan at that point. And then after graduating, I decided to go back and I went to Kyoto. And that's where I started really kind of deepening my knowledge of Japanese music. I studied Japanese flute, so Shakuhachi, it's a kind of bamboo flute, and a little bit of the koto as well. And then I managed to get into Japanese music college over there, so I studied composition, but mainly focusing on traditional Japanese instruments. It was very difficult and I wrote my thesis in Japanese. It was a really great experience. I got to learn about Japanese aesthetics. Some examples would be yugen and ma. So yugen, I guess, I'd explain as kind of, I guess, a kind of Japanese sublime, and ma would be concepts of space and the in-betweenness, in between moments, and also mujo as well, which is about transience and thing with fleeting moments of time.
Could you also explain a bit more about the Japanese instruments that you studied as well?
I studied a range. I guess the most interesting ones would be the Japanese court music, so gagaku. I studied the sho, which is a kind of, it's a Japanese bamboo mouth organ, but it's very interesting. It's got like tons of these tiny little cylindrical pieces of bamboo. It's meant to look like a phoenix. That was very interesting to learn to do that. And also the koto, which is a zither, so it's a 17-string piece of wood. Basically a piece of wood with 17 strings on it, or 13, depending on how big it is. Which is a very interesting instrument. It's got a great sound as well. And as I mentioned before, shakuhachi, the bamboo flute.
Could you explain a bit more about how this affected your learning Japanese? First of all, how it would have negatively affected your learning Japanese.
So it was very difficult to kind of I think it was like trying to get an emotional attachment to a sound. So learning in England, I guess it was more like rote in a way, and plus there was no real chance to speak. So everything I learned was just like abstract words. So it's really hard to kind of accept a different word into my brain without feeling like I needed it. This obviously changed when I moved to Japan, but studying in England, I found it quite difficult. I also found connecting, I think it was more the grammar, so connecting ideas together, really, really difficult. I understood each kind of, I guess, each concept, each part of the language really well, but putting it together into a sentence, I really struggled with it. And also finding the kind of rhythm with the language as well. I didn't really understand how the language, the kind of the flow of the language. So yeah, it took me a long time to really understand these.
Were there any ways in which your dyslexia was a benefit whilst learning Japanese?
Actually, weirdly, yes. So I guess with English, you go from here to here, you read along that way. I've always really struggled with this, and studying Japanese has kind of, it's like freed a part of my brain that was stuck or trapped. So reading, I guess, so right to left, down as well, has been freeing, to say the least. I've really enjoyed it, and also things like reading the Chinese characters as well. I find that so easy. It's just a picture, and if you break it down, it's just tons of tiny little radicals that have their own meaning, and it just literally, when I read Japanese, the character just flies into my mind and I instantly know what it means. When reading English and reading the alphabet and trying to understand, you know, words or letters put together and what that actually means, I find it very difficult.
Do you think that being neurodivergent has affected you and your work in positive ways?
I actually do. So when I first started out writing, I was very concerned about kind of, I guess, fitting in and doing things the way that everyone else is doing it. Then moving to Japan and experiencing very different ways of doing or creating music, creating art, I feel I'm more confident now to take risks. I don't need to follow what the norm is. I can actually just be myself and go with that. Also, other ways would be so including how I think, and I guess I kind of think in very formatted ways, so lots of ideas that are kind of fragmented, and then I use those fragmented ideas and I put them together.
Could you talk about the themes of your recent opera and how they relate to your experiences with being neurodivergent?
Yes, so I did an opera last year, 2019, for the Grime-Born Opera Festival, and it was called The Crane. So it was about a magical crane maiden. So I wrote it in English and Japanese, and I think a lot of what was going on in the opera was about language and communication and how people communicate with each other. So one idea that I was working on was kind of switching between English and Japanese, which I find very difficult. So one of the characters was a Japanese speaking character, the other was an English speaking character. And throughout the play, the opera, their language becomes even more jumbled. And then eventually they switch languages. So one speaks English, the other speaks Japanese, vice versa. So I kind of explored, I guess, what's going on in my head a lot of the time, how difficult it is to switch from one language. And when you get into one language, and then you kind of remember a word or something in the other language, and then you end up switching fully into the other. So it kind of deals with that complexity. And also slightly connected is the word recall. So some of the scenes, only one word was in a different language depending on the character, which I really struggle with. It's the bane of my life, is recalling a word, a specific word, and also a specific word in the right language. So sometimes I can say something and it's like the word "the" has completely been erased from my brain. It doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes the word, for example, cat, will come in my head in Japanese and I cannot remember what it is in English. It's like it doesn't exist in English, it only exists in Japanese. And also ideas that I explored as well was this idea, because everything happens in my head at once, I kind of had a lot of different ideas kind of juxtaposed. I wouldn't even say juxtaposed, I think sometimes it was just clashing on purpose, because I kind of wanted people to feel what it's like to be in my head.
So, hi, Verity. It was really fascinating to hear you talking about your journey through music, and having spent 10 years studying in Japan. And I wanted to ask a few questions really about kind of following on from your talk. And first off, I wondered what it was like studying with John Mayer at such an early age.
Yeah, it kind of happened as a bit of a random situation. I switched violin teachers. I started off on the violin, and her husband just happened to be John Mayer. And
Wow.
and I was just writing, I'd been writing music since I was 6, just like learning the violin. So every time I learned a new note, I would then incorporate that into like really basic pieces of music. And then my mum showed him my work and he really wanted to teach me. So I thought it was just such a great experience, because we kind of, well, it was more like a collaborative experience. So he used to say to me, "You're not going to be a composer, you are a composer now."
Wow.
We're equal.
The age of 10.
Yes, but it was just so great though. So we studied a lot, but it was more like music as concepts. So he said, you know, he was very kind of poignant, I guess. It wasn't like Western music was music and this was this kind of music. It was more like there's all different concepts and ways of thinking about music, and we kind of learned each kind of music, and I guess culturally as well. So we kind of looked at things in that perspective, which I felt has held me in good stead. And then studying at music college as well, the Western concept of music it's done so differently. So I think I really got to learn, I guess, just assimilate ideas of music in different ways. And then obviously focusing on, we did a lot of work on like Indian raga and Indian instruments and things as well. So I wrote for the sitar, tabla, at about 10, 11 years old as well, and then orchestral.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so varied. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
And he was known sort of primarily for fusions of Indian music and jazz.
Yeah.
Has that influenced your playing at all?
I think it has. I think he was more into I don't really know how to explain it. I guess more his idea was from my perspective, was more to do with kind of putting through, kind of being, I don't know, authentic in like bringing two styles authentically together. I think my style is more about, there's authenticity, but it's more about switching things on its head. So playing an instrument the wrong way round, for example. So yeah.
Okay. So you kind of moved on from there to an interest in Japanese music. How did that come about?
So we studied a lot about Japanese music as well. And I don't know, I just felt it resonated somehow with me. I've always written a lot about nature. I guess essentially like the human experience, but even as a child I was writing about, I don't know, butterflies, but it wasn't really in the romantic sense. It's more in the real sense of, I know it sounds quite sad, but butterflies dying or things like this, like, but the beauty in that. So it feels very close to Japanese culture anyway. So I just decided to focus on Japanese music and then the language as well, because I realized I wouldn't be able to deepen my knowledge unless I understood the language.
There's a very, the music and nature are very kind of integral, aren't they? And I was very interested hearing you talking about playing the shakuhachi, because it was very popular at Dartington College, where I studied in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. And I kind of remember it for its very haunting sound. I wondered if you could say a bit more about your interest in the shakuhachi.
Well, actually, I'm not going to play it, but I brought one here just to show.
Wow.
Nice, yeah. But it's, yeah, I think it's the kind of, it's the versatility of the instrument. It's very versatile. The sound is meant to like represent wind going through, like various types of wind going through a bamboo grove. So depending on your position of your mouth and how you're holding it, because it's very much, the head movements and all of this. And so it's, yeah, it creates so many different kinds of sounds, different textures. I have stranger ways of writing for it these days, which involve a lot of like flowing like this, taking it apart as well. And I've created different like trills and things, but
wow.
Yeah, I feel like there's just so much to do. Really, I feel like it's got so much scope to it. It's similar for me as a violinist. It's like a violin in some ways, in my like the way I kind of approach it.
Oh wow, right.
Because I don't know, it's just so, there's just so many things. It's like endless. The things that you can achieve on it, similar to the violin for me. It's just completely endless. You could just go on forever creating new sounds and playing it in different ways.
I really look forward, hope one day to be able to see you playing live. It'd be such a treat. It's absolutely fascinating. Moving on, you talk quite a lot about Japanese aesthetics, the Yugen and Ma and Maya, and I wonder how those have influenced your journey in music making.
Yeah, I started to study when I was at music college in Japan, more about aesthetics. I'd studied before, but it didn't quite make sense. Like I couldn't feel what it was supposed. Like I understood what it was supposed to be, but I just couldn't feel. I couldn't get a sense of how does that feel. Especially like concepts of ma, because you read a lot, and everyone has their own opinions about this concept of silence, but for me, it's not really. I don't see it as silence. I write silence into the music, but it's not silence. It's more. It's like, I feel like it's several things. It kind of gives you that moment to think about what's just happened. You also then get a chance to center yourself and hear what's going on in the world, the environment where you are at the moment. And then it also prepares you for the next thing to come, for me. And also there's like different lengths. But I don't know, I can now feel where it should be in the music naturally. Things like Yugen as well. I started to study about no theatre, and yeah, I just find it fascinating. For me, it's more like, I would say, like the Japanese sublime. It's something very refined and very beautiful. But it's also about transience. There's so many things part of it. It's transience and beauty and life in its true authentic self, but it's feelings that, I guess, like my music writing's changed because of it. I have to write in this feeling, because it's not just about the notes and the sound either. It's about a whole combination of everything, and the performance style as well. So whoever's performing it, how they are on the stage is very, very important. So it's the whole thing, yeah.
It's a very pictorial.
Yeah, I feel, yeah.
Way of approach to music, isn't it? And the language also is very pictorial. And you know, I've often heard people with dyslexia talking about having a greater depth of field and a more enhanced visual sense of the world. Although I've not seen many studies of that, but I wondered if there are particular characters within the Japanese language that appeal to you.
Because there's no specific character, but I feel that, so some of the complex kanji, the Chinese characters, are made up of like several little components, like radicals. But when you look at it, it feels like the images all just fly into my head, and I can just instantly get an understanding of what it is, without even having to, like, even if I don't know the character, I can still get an understanding. And even a lot when I speak, if I speak in Japanese, or if someone else is speaking in Japanese and there's a word I don't know, or maybe a new word, but the character flashes into my head. So if I'm saying something, I get the images of the Chinese characters flashing in my head as I'm saying it, which I don't get in English.
Right.
But it's very easy. Like, I can see it in my head, like the picture as I'm speaking, or when people are talking.
Is that kind of what you mean when you would, in your talk, you were saying how freeing the Japanese language has been for you, that it's kind of opened up another another aspect within your consciousness?
Yeah, I think, that's probably it. It's definitely a different way of communication, and I guess communication with myself within as well, I think. Because English I don't feel it comes naturally to me. Speaking as well, it doesn't feel I can't feel connected to it in the same way that I feel in Japanese, with pictures. It feels much more, I don't know, I feel there's some sort of comfort in being able to see something visually, I think.
Do you think there's something there around kind of Japanese culture and neurodivergence being kind of more accepting in some way?
I don't know. I think maybe, perhaps, I just feel in terms of, like I was saying in the talk, how everything is, I guess, the opposite way round to English, but the opposite way round for me is the right way round.
Right.
Like, if I could read English that way round, I think it would be perfect. I don't know why, but it's just more natural to go, I guess, the other way round, and reading down as well and across. Found the most, I didn't know that that would happen, but I thought, oh God, this is so easy. And then I remember in my class, loads of people found that quite difficult to read that way. And I thought, this is like the best thing ever. Like, I can finally, this part of my brain is like now working. It was like dormant. And now I'm like really shifting everything a bit more wider.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I was wondering how things have been for you through this period of lockdown. You know, globally things are still pretty precarious. And I just wanted to ask you what you've been working on in the last few months.
So I was supposed to have a set of a week of concerts at the end of this year and next year, which of all this year has been cancelled, and next year has been postponed to the following year. So a lot of they're all performance projects, and my opera as well, which I did last year, I was going to do next year for a week long run. But I kind of shifted how I work, and I'm doing video art now. So I'm working and learning how to edit, and looking at, so I've videoed a lot of, well, I guess documented a lot of things that I've seen over lockdown, and I'm sort of making some art, I guess. So looking at editing and then creating the music for that. So yeah.
Fantastic. So will any of that work be shown online?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. So that's what I'm looking to do at the moment, is just looking at new ways as well to exhibit it, and how I can do that. Kind of like a lot of out of the box thinking, really, just trying to work out how to approach it, because now I'm working in a completely different way. So, but it's exciting.
So we have to kind of follow you on social media to find out where we can see some of that, Verity.
Thank you.
Many thanks, and I really look forward to hearing some of the composition. Thanks to everybody for joining us for this fascinating discussion about language, music, and neurodiversity. We've pasted a link to feedback forms on our artist presentations on YouTube and Facebook, and we'd appreciate your help by filling those in. Our next artist presentation will be streamed via our Facebook and YouTube on Wednesday, the 2nd of September at 7 p.m. And visually impaired theatre practitioner Amelia Carvalho will introduce some of the ways to think about integrating audio description into various types of performance. Amelia runs Quiplash, a group set up to further queer crit performance, who've been running online queer audio description classes. So we look forward to seeing you then. And again, once more, thanks very much, Verity, for joining us.